We can use power in an oppressive way, in a way that is driven by fear, that is controlling, that is autocratic, that is subjugating. Or we can use power to be liberating and freeing. We can step into our own power and speak our healthy truth and set healthy boundaries and help others rise as well. And we can use our power or our skills or our attributes, whether it be maybe fame or position or entitlement or privilege or whatever it may be, we can use that to actually give to the world and be more collaborative.
Are you ready to bust through your fears, connect to your purpose, and take inspired action to build a business that fuels your soul and your bank account? Welcome to Luscious Hustle, the podcast for soulful entrepreneurs. I'm Betsy Milne.
And I'm Laura Milne. We're transformational brand and business coaches, bringing you the tools, ideas, and motivation you need to propel your side hustle from a spark of an idea to a full-fledged, lucrative business and luscious life.
Tune in each week as we teach you our unique blend of spiritual practices mixed with savvy business strategy to help you scale and grow your brand with ease.
Thanks for joining us today. Now let's get started.
Today on the podcast, we're excited to introduce you to Stefanos Stefandos. In his work, Stefanos facilitates transformational growth through neuro-empowerment practices. By immersing himself deep in men's empowerment work and intimate relationships, Stefanos merges the best of Eastern and Western methodologies and philosophies to promote balance, sacredness, and joy in life. Having worked with elite special forces soldiers, Olympic gold medalists, and multiple world champion fighters, we're thrilled to have Stefanos joining us on the podcast to share his own unique perspective on masculine and feminine energy. Today, he is here sharing his story of how he traversed the depths of his own pain to overcome his destructive patterns, the importance of the men's empowerment movement, and insights into navigating today's ever-changing social landscape. It's a powerful episode, so let's dive in.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, well, how are you?
Good, thank you. So we're super excited to have you on the podcast.
We really are.
Likewise.
Yeah.
When Ryan Yakomi first mentioned you to us and the work that you were doing, we got super excited because there's not a lot of guys talking about this stuff.
We're like, there's another dude talking about this? This is amazing.
Masculine and feminine. Love it.
Cool. That's so
amazing.
Good.
Well, let's just dive in. Your work is really amazing. And you know what you're sharing and putting out there on social media is really incredible. And on your website, I mean, you're really going deep in the spiritual and in particularly with men, which I think it's so needed because there aren't a lot of men deeper diving into, you know, helping people recognize their infinite potential and really taking ownership for that. And, you know, I feel like in terms of discussing masculine and feminine energies, like we're just barely scratching the surface. So we would love to explore and talk about that more. How did you first get started in like talking about masculine energy, talking about spirituality and like men's empowerment?
Yeah, so for me, it was firstly, thank you for having me on your show as well. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. I'm very excited. So for me, it was really my own journey, or a lack of integrity in my own journey prompted me to really deep dive into what does it mean to be a healthy man in contemporary times? What does it mean to be a masculine man? And that essentially took me on, I mean, it's a winding path and it's a rabbit hole, or should I say multiple rabbit holes, and it's something that I'm continuously exploring on a daily basis. But essentially, when I say my own journey, I looked at I got to a point in my life where life wasn't working. Life was disjointed. I was out of integrity. I was dishonest in my communication, in who I was being in the world. I was unfaithful in my relationships. My relationship to women wasn't really healthy. My relationship to myself wasn't healthy. It was in constant conflict, and there was tension and agitation, frustration, and just anger and disconnect. I felt so isolated in my life. And a number of years ago, I was in a relationship where I was considerably unfaithful in that relationship, and she found out, and I didn't even have the courage to tell her. I was way out of integrity because I was presenting one aspect of myself, but hiding and living in this shadow aspect of self as well so much. And that prompted me, I started to relive a lot of trauma from my childhood from that experience. It brought up a lot of stuff. My mind started to open. My body started to feel very different. And what that essentially did was observing the pain in her brought me back to my childhood, where I grew up in a very physically abusive and emotionally abusive, volatile household. And all of these memories just started flooding back to me. And even today, memories come back to me that my brother would mention something to me and he would say, hey, remember when this happened? And I would be, no, I don't. And then I'd go into that memory and start to understand it and have a deeper recollection. There was just so much pain from my childhood that I brought into my adult life. And bringing that into my adult life unconsciously, it drove my behavior. Now, that's not an excuse or excuses, they're reasons. And when I started to unpack that, I became empowered and I started to make a choice around who I really wanted to be in the world. And the man that I was being was modeling men that I had witnessed growing up that weren't healthy, that weren't connected men, that weren't men that respected themselves, knew themselves, or respected others at any level of substance. And that just wasn't the man I wanted to be, and it wasn't the person I wanted to be. And so I went very deep into making considerable and massive transformations in how I presented to myself, because I felt that was a big part of healthy masculinity is knowing self, feeling self, connecting to the core essence of self, and then bringing that into the world. I felt that was a massive component of it, and that's where the journey really began.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Honestly, there's like 14 things I want to unpack from what you said.
I know.
It's incredible.
Being honest was it. That was what it really was. If I had to condense it, it was to stop telling lies and start telling the truth. If I really had to condense it.
Well, so what's interesting about this conversation, and this is, divine timing, we were on a coaching call this morning with one of our students, and we were talking about integrity. And you use that word twice, and it really resonates on such a deep level because we live in this world now where authenticity is like the key word of the moment. Everyone needs to show up authentically. And at the core of that, though, is integrity. We have to do stuff that's aligned with us. So I'm curious, I don't even know if I have a question there, but I just really love that you use the word integrity today, because I don't think we talk about that enough, about our core values and working through our core values to show up authentically, because it sounds like that's what you had to do. You had to work through and find a new set of core values, or maybe identify them for the first time.
Yeah, a combination of both. That's a really great point. Identify core values for the first time, create a new set of core values, absolutely, because I stripped the layers off myself, of my own identity, multiple times over and over. My social circles, not all of them, but some of them changed. My relationship to myself, to women, to my family, to trauma, to fear, to pain, to the world, to friendship, to purpose, to the idea of what does it mean to be a man, all of that drastically changed. And for me, there's so many buzzwords in the world today, and so many of us, and I've definitely been one of these people as well. And it's a good thing. There's no judgment here, because when we use buzzwords and we have no idea what they mean, at some point we either call ourselves out or we get called out on them. And so we're sort of forced to then go into either stop using the buzzword or actually go into it and really identify with its core meaning. And so authenticity is one of those. And let me tell you, when I say I've unpacked this, I've created a 14-principle model on authenticity. I've really unpacked what it means to be authentic and in integrity. And in its simplest form, authenticity for me means this: that your inner world matches your outer world. Your outer world matches your inner world. That's it. So your thoughts, your beliefs, your emotional states, your feelings about certain things, they match your actions, your behaviors, your personal relationships, and your projection into the world. That is basically at its core, that you're being in truth and that you're doing truth in the world. And truth is alignment with what your inner world tells you and what you're being in your outer world.
I love that.
It's so good. And, you talked about like men cheating, lying about it, denying truth, gaslighting. And I'm reminded of, those books like the 4 Agreements. And one of the 4 Agreements is like being impeccable with your word, right? Like really like you, and I think to me, you've just illustrated that, like your inner world and your outer world, your words and your actions have to match. And so in terms of feminism gets a lot of attention, and talking about women and empowerment and all that gets a lot of attention, and also sometimes gets backlash, but there's very little talk about men's empowerment. Like, how can men start to step into their own spiritual work, heal themselves. And, you know, in a way, like, it sounds silly because you might think, well, men don't need to rise up because, you know, men have been in power for a long time. And, but that's like men being in their divine masculine is the opposite of the patriarchy. Like and so what does that look like in terms of men stepping away, maybe even for a man who doesn't understand that what his actions or what he's doing is contributing to wounded toxic behaviors, is contributing to the patriarchy? How can a man start to step into his own empowerment?
It's a great question. I really resonate with what you've said. Men do need to rise, and it's a healthy expression, healthy version of men as a collective and as individuals that needs to rise, and that goes for women as well. That goes for every human being. There is a rise. There is a movement at the moment towards bettering and evolving humanity and evolving the human construct and evolving human expression relationships. And so to answer your question very directly, we hear a great deal around sister circles. We need brother circles. We need tribes of brothers, men coming together, really opening their hearts and stepping into a new form of leadership. And that's where we start. No man is an island. We've heard that saying, we've heard that adage before, no man is an island. And when we look at our evolution as human beings, we have evolved in tribes. We have evolved in close contact. We're pro-social beings. When we look at the role of man and we look at the role of men as a tribe or as groups, we've spent so much time together hunting, gathering, connecting, providing, protecting. And we've done that. Of course, if we've had to do it on our own, yes, we've done it on our own, but we've done it in bands of brothers. You know, groups of men would come together, and there would be men that would be more proficient at certain skills, and they would take a lead on that. There would be other men that would be potentially better at hunting. They would take lead on that. There would be men that are setting the perimeter. They would take lead on that. There would be support in that brotherhood. This notion of who am I was not so much an issue because you're so deeply connected to a clan or a tribe or a brotherhood that your identity was, I don't want to say dictated to, that's a strong word, but it was directed by that group of men that you surrounded yourself with that is intrinsically connected to survivability. Now, evolution isn't everything when we're talking about the physiology of man or humanity, but it's an important component. We've obviously evolved in consciousness and spirituality and how we see ourselves in the world, and metacognition and the development of our prefrontal lobe and our frontal cortices and so forth. And that has changed the way we understand reality in the world and the cosmos, and that's ever evolving. When we just strip it back just for a moment, men have grown up, evolved in tribes. And in modernity, in contemporary times, we're very isolated as men. I have a private Facebook group called The Conscious Man. And in that group, there are nearly 1,500 men in that group, highly active. And I curate each man that comes in. They answer a set of questions. And not every man has to answer the questions, but most men do. And one of the prevailing themes is loneliness, being alone, feeling isolated in the world, among some other issues as well. And so I'm going to come back to honoring your question. The first thing we need to do as men is come together with supportive, trusted, respected, revered brothers that can see us for who we are and that we can grow together. That's powerful. And that's where we need to start.
Yeah, that's so fascinating because you think, I mean, maybe this is just me being naive, but like my guy friends from high school are still friends. They still hang out. Same thing, my friends from college, you know, we did fantasy football together. I mean, they all still hang out. Did fantasy football with my brother's friends. But, you know, the what I always admired about my guy friends was how close they were, how tight-knit they were, whereas girls were always sort of in competition with each other in high school and college because we were competing for guys, I guess. I don't know. I wasn't really paying attention to that part of it. But listening to you talk, like what women crave, it's the same with men. And sometimes we forget that. Like, you know, we get into relationships and it's like, oh, don't go have a guy's weekend. Or, you know, like there's always this play of power in there. And so I'm curious.
Well, that comes from fear.
Is that what it is? That was my question, actually. Where does that come from?
Yeah, I thought so, yeah. That comes from fear. Any time there's a power play, in a sense of the individual, whether it's a man or a woman, is trying to retain control of a situation, it's because that individual is embedded neurologically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, physiologically in fear, largely probably more unconscious than conscious. And it's a habitual patterning or a coping strategy or a compensatory strategy that's been developed as a young child that served them as a young child. And then they've brought that behavior into their adult relationships and how they move in the world and how they be in the world. And from there, it's all about control, because control, the more control we can have of others or our environment, people are in our others, people are in our environment, others are in our environment. The more control we have, the safer we feel. And so the less tension we experience. And of course, one of the brain's prerogatives is to be safe and secure. And so that obviously drives a great deal of how we move through the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So then what would you say are some of the masculine behaviors that are most misunderstood when it comes to ego and these destructive behaviors and fear? Because we talk a lot on this podcast about masculine and feminine behaviors. And we understand that men can be feminine, divine feminine, and women can be masculine. So it's not like a one size fits all. But what are some of the masculine behaviors in men or women that are the masculine behaviors that are most misunderstood? Got it.
Yeah, definitely. Power is one of them.
Okay.
So definitely, and power is one of those. So every expression, so when we look at masculine and feminine expressions, all we're doing is we're looking at two sides of the same coin. It's a polarity, and it exists within all of us. Mm-hmm. And so power is interesting. This word power, I use the word power often, and I love the word power. I don't know if I say I love it, but I'm very much resonant with the word power because of my intention behind the way I use it. Now, power, like any attribute, can have a light expression or a conscious expression. It can have an unconscious or shadow expression as well. So, for example, power is one that we can use power in an oppressive way, in a way that is driven by fear, that is controlling, that is autocratic, that is subjugating. Or we can use power to be liberating and freeing. We can step into our own power and speak our healthy truth and set healthy boundaries and help others rise as well. And we can use our power or our skills or our attributes, whether it be maybe fame or position or entitlement or privilege or whatever it may be, we can use that to actually give to the world and be more collaborative. Understand that people that behave in certain ways are coming from very set values. So power is one of those attributes, and being powerful is a masculine attribute. Doesn't mean women can't be powerful. Of course they can. But being powerful is a masculine attribute, and it's often misused in today's world because in today's society, we're so driven by fear. We're so driven by control. We're so driven by competition. And it's morphed into this unhealthy competition that it's a survival of the fittest, and it's literally every man for themselves, and it's keeping up with the Joneses. It's these mentalities that are coming in and permeating our social and individual attitudes. And so another characteristic that can be misunderstood is dominance or being dominant. And so this is this is an interesting one. So being dominant in self and behavior is a masculine attribute. Again, women possess dominance or an ability to be dominant. And when we look at it, how dominance or the essence, the energy of dominance is used in today's world, largely, unless people are very healthy psycho-emotionally, they have a very clean relationship to their own selves and to their pain, their fears, their trauma, they have a more holistic and whole view of themselves, they will use dominance to, once again, satisfy the urges of fear that are permeating through them, and they'll be controlling, and they'll do that usually at any cost. And so they'll dominate others. And they'll oppress others and suppress the voice of others or the expression or the being of others. And they'll be loud and dominant in a way that is not healthy. And it's not connected, it's not inclusive, it's exclusive. And so in today's world, there's many masculine characteristics like fierceness, for example. Competitiveness is another masculine characteristic. Being singular in focus, singularity and focus is a masculine characteristic, where these characteristics are distorted in today's world because we live in a hyper-masculine world, and anything that is hyper is extreme, and anything that is extreme is not balanced. It's imbalanced. And therefore, there's no harmony in expression. So most of these will get distorted. Doing energy. Doing is a masculine attribute. Again, we spend so much time and focus on doing, on identifying with the status that we have, on our actions and activity, on the amount of money we have or the material possessions that we have. We spend so much energy in that realm that we forget to be. And what is a being energy? What does that actually mean? And so again, there's a distortion because there's a level of extremity being expressed in the human being that then lends itself to, oh, we live in a male-dominated culture. We live in this doing culture. Doing is necessary in the world. This notion that doing is not necessary and we have to stop doing is a farce. Like, it's ridiculous. But we do need to bring ourselves into greater balance again, because if we're too one way of a spectrum, we're not accessing any of the other tools in our tool belt. And life doesn't just require a screwdriver or a hammer. It requires multiple tools to navigate. I hope that helps a little bit. Goal orientation is another one as well for that that can be massively distorted.
Yeah.
This is so awesome because I think, pointing out the light side and the dark side to, power and dominance and goal orientation. I think you're right. For both men and women, we associate mostly power with the negative side of it, oppression and fear-based, and same thing with dominance, controlling people. And it's unfortunate for both men and women. Like for women, I find that they tend to push away in their inner masculine energy because they don't want to be associated with the dark side of power. So then they don't think of themselves as being powerful at all, which is silly. And then also men, I think, are missing out too in understanding that, well, you can be powerful and that doesn't mean you have to be oppressive. You can use your power and liberate other people. And, you used the word privilege before. And I thought that's so interesting because privilege is being thrown away around so much lately. And we always associate privilege as like, oh, you have white privilege, like you're a bad person. But privilege is just privilege. You can use it in a positive way too. And I think that there's such a huge opportunity for men to have their power, have dominance, be goal oriented, but do so on the light side, in the divine way.
I completely resonate with that. And just to touch on something that you just mentioned now with respect to white privilege, I would say that, I have no proof of this. I would say 95% plus of the population would have no idea what white privilege is. And so, and there lies in another issue that we have this lack of awareness that we have about who we are. Privilege is very important. And there's layers and levels of privilege as well. Massively, and these are unconscious systemic ways that we operate in our society that drive our individual behaviors and drive how we treat each other and treat ourselves, and then compound over time. And if we don't pay attention to these issues and we don't start bringing them up in mainstream conversation, we're just going to perpetuate further ignorance, and we're going to continue to further isolate ourselves. Men are going to be isolated from within. It's just focus on difference instead of, hey, yes, we're different, and we can celebrate that. And hey, yeah, we're also the same in many ways. Let's celebrate that too. And again, I'm not looking at extreme examples of where difference is threatening our lives, or difference is there's an obsession with difference, that we're scared of difference and therefore we have to protect what is ours. And these are more extreme examples. But I'm talking about just difference in, okay, you aesthetically look different to me. Cool. Great, let's celebrate that. Let's celebrate the diversity and the richness in that, and the creativity that can come from being different, and how that lends itself to the outer world influences and impacts the inner world, and vice versa. And how can we co-create together and co-collaborate? And I know that that's not always going to be possible. I'm not anywhere near naive to that. The reality is the human mind cannot contemplate more than a few hundred people, really. But to ask the brain to contemplate 7 billion people and to form intimate relationships with 7.65 billion people is ridiculous. Yeah. So we just need to start with ourselves and our immediate family, friends, and tribe. Let's just start there, and then we can expand consciousness. So I'm not naive to think that, hey, let's just create this utopian world where men, women, and every other gender in between just gets along greatly, and the 7.5 billion people forming deep, intimate relationships. Honestly, the level of consciousness that we are at the moment as a collective, it's just not fucking going to happen, full stop. And that's just the truth. That's the reality of it. And we have to acknowledge that and embrace that. And when we do, we can then move from there and say, well, what can we do for ourselves in our immediate tribe as a starting point? Let's refine that first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this conversation is just fascinating. Like my mind is going in 13 directions, but the thing that I really like about you, like you've done the work. That's the shortest way to say this. Like you've done the work. Your work speaks for itself and you've been on this path for a while. So I'm curious, can you walk us through your journey a little bit that has gotten you to here? Because I think sometimes people see the end product and they're like, oh, I can't get there. But we know, Laura and I know, that when we have worked through our own traumas and we've shown up and we've done the work, it's like every time you level up, shit comes up. So you don't get from point A to point B in a straight line. So I'm just curious, like, how did this work evolve for you? Because I'm sure there were challenges along the way that made you question your resolve. And yet you keep doing it and you keep showing up. And what you're saying is just so truthful and it just resonates on such a deep level. So how did you get started on this path?
Yeah, of course. The first thing I want to say to that is that anything that is worth pursuing is going to come with brightness and glory and also hardship. And that's, again, the balance and polarity of life. Mm-hmm. And that's the contrast that we experience. That's how we learn. I feel where we're at as a humanity, collectively, our level of spiritual maturity, per se, for lack of a better term, is that we, fortunately or unfortunately, we're just at a stage where we cannot really learn and grow and transform extreme expressions of behavior without vast and intense contrast. In other words, we have to hit rock bottom and get dragged across the rock face of rock bottom multiple times before we say, okay, maybe it's time to change. That's been my personal experience with myself, and it's been my experience with so many others on so many different levels. And so when we do that, when we make the commitment to really change and to really shift who we are being in the world, everything changes for us. But we have to be committed and willing to traverse pain and fear and our personal trauma, that and so much more. And so for me, that was a deep commitment and willingness that I made to that. I really opened that up in myself and said, I'm going deep no matter what, whether it means death, suicide, whether it means malnutrition, whether it means mental asylum, whether it means I get out of this and I'm able to teach others and impart wisdom and knowledge and inspire others, but continue to inspire my own path. Whatever the outcome is, I don't care. I'm not attached to that. I am going deep for the process, not the outcome, because I'm tired of living this type of life. And I did that and I committed to that. And there were times when I was deeply, deeply suicidal and in intense pain, and was disconnected from my own self and lost so much of who I was. And it was painful. It was painful. And so that the major catalyst for that was that relationship that I mentioned a number of years ago that I was in. And that really prompted me to go deep. I came at a fork in a road and I said, I can continue the same behavior that I am, but really live unhappily. I was living a life of hedonism, extreme hedonistic behavior. I was living a life of ignorance. I was living a life of burn build. My businesses and my expression and service in the world was disjointed and unclear and confused. And one month I'd make a heap of money. The next 2 months I'd be broke. And the next month I'd make more money. And I just put it down to market volatility or the business. I never took responsibility. And so I really took responsibility. I sought spiritual healers, mentors, guides, psychologists. I mean, I had seen people from a young age as well, but I really went deep. I was spending hours every day, 8 to 15 hours a day on personal growth. And I did that for quite some time. And I really, instead of isolating from myself, I created solitude in my space, deliberate solitude to be with me and be with the pain and be with the fear and let it all come up and all arise. And that was liberating. That was freeing in and of itself massively.
So was there ever judgment from people around you? Because I feel like guys would judge doing that if they weren't in an evolved sort of awakened state. Or were people around you supportive as you went in and started on this path?
Both. So there were people in my life that were really supportive, and there were people in my life that weren't. And that hurt. That was part of the journey. It was part of the release. That was part of the letting go. That was part of the realization. That was part of who I was and who I needed to be and who I was becoming.
Mm-hmm. I feel like I'm stunned. I feel like I love everything that you said. The thing that you said that I love, one of the things the most was do it for the process, not the outcome. Like people always say oh, it's about the journey, not the destination. And that's become so cliched that it's just, it doesn't ring true for anyone, but it really is true. Like, you did a ton of spiritual work on yourself. And just the act of the process is intrinsically valuable. It wasn't necessarily about the outcome, but of course you did have a really positive outcome. And I think that's something that we forget. And you mentioned before, in the hyper-masculine world, it's all about doing and goal-oriented. Everything becomes about the goal and not about where are you right now? What process is happening and how are you growing? And I love that that's what your work is about. It's us stepping into our infinite potential and the work that it takes to get us there. That is intrinsically powerful and meaningful, and it just can exist on its own. It doesn't need to have necessarily, we have goals, but it doesn't have to be just for the goal.
That's my primary definition of success, is a complete immersion and commitment to the journey you're choosing to take. That for me is my primary definition of success. Definitely success can be defined by outcomes and results. And if you set an intention and you meet your goals and your objectives and you achieve them, there's definitely success in that as well. But for me, the primary definition of success is commitment to and taking action on and full immersion into especially challenges, but into anything that you put yourself into.
I love that definition. That is a really good definition of success. Yeah. Everyone especially, I find, Betsy and I being in the entrepreneurial business space and we're showing people how to build their businesses. It's so easy to become fixated on success is I make X amount of dollars per month. Success is I launched a program and sold it out. Success is that always becomes success instead of the work it takes for you to get there.
Yeah.
Really good. I have a question now too about, because I'd love to come back to the masculine and the feminine and just sort of juxtapose them a little bit so people can understand. If you're in your divine masculine, what does that look like? What does the divine masculine crave versus the divine feminine? How do those two differ from their wounded counterparts? I know, I just threw a really big question at you.
We know you can handle it though, because I read your Instagram feed. I see your posts. You really dive into this so succinctly, so I'm excited to hear you say this.
I always say I write better than I speak. Okay, so let me start with the divine. And then I'll definitely forget the second part of your question, because that's what I do, because I'll just focus on the first, and then you'll re-ask it again, please. And then we'll go into that. So divine masculine, what does divine masculine look like? Divine masculine is expansive. Here's the thing. Let me just backtrack a little bit. It's all fucking divine. Full stop. That's it. So no matter if you're being manipulative, which is a dark shadow expression of the feminine, and men are also manipulative as well. So there are certain leaders in our world today, I'm not going to mention any names, who people will say, oh, he's in his unhealthy masculine. And he's actually in his unhealthy feminine. Because being manipulative is an unhealthy feminine trait or expression. It's the shadow side of the feminine. It's a shadow expression of the feminine. And so we miss that. I'm just giving you a very simple example, but it's all divine. It's all as it needs to be in somewhat esoteric terms. But when we're looking at what's healthy behavior and unhealthy behavior, that's obviously that when the moment I say healthy and unhealthy, I'm pinning that against a set of values or ideals. So now we're talking about what does it mean to be a good masculine person and what does it mean to be a good feminine person? And fortunately or unfortunately, that's a subjective term, because what I think is good and what you think is good is different. Let that sit for a moment. And this is one of the issues that we face in today's world as well, in terms of relating, how we relate to each other and how we are in relationships. I'll come back to that, but let's focus on divine masculine. Let's focus on healthy attributes of what it means to be into a divine embodied masculine self. So the divine masculine is expansive. The divine masculine seeks for stillness and silence. He doesn't actually seek for conflict. The divine masculine seeks for expansion. When I say expansion, I'm speaking about infinite possibility. I'm speaking about the infinite. He's seeking to be nothingness in the cosmos. And so when we articulate that in everyday terms, what does that look like? That looks like the divine masculine not being involved, define it apathetically, not wanting to be involved in conflict, not wanting to be involved in the minutiae or the detail. The divine masculine wants to be in the world in such a way that is limitless, is not restricted by cultural norms or nuances. Now, that doesn't mean that the divine masculine also isn't a warrior, because the divine masculine is a warrior, has that warrior energy, and can still be in divine presence when in battle. And the Bhagavad Gita is a beautiful example of this. And there's a paradox here, right? And there is a paradox here, because I just said, well, the divine masculine in expansion doesn't seek conflict. He doesn't seek conflict. But if conflict arises because we live in a world where that is a reality, it's how the divine masculine meets that conflict that defines his divinity or not. If he pursues conflict and wishes to be autocratic and oppressive and controlling, then his warrior energy is in the shadow. If he's met with conflict and meets that conflict then with grace, and shows up in his power and his presence and in his gifts, in his skills, in his strength, then he is in stable and noble warrior energy.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
That's very clear. I like that definition. Yeah.
Okay, what about the divine feminine then?
Yeah. So the divine, and then I'm just plucking some attributes here. I'm not, another domain of the masculine is time and space. And so how the masculine orientates through time and space, when he does that gracefully, when he does that with comprehension and awareness, he's in his divinity per se. But there are many domains of the masculine, there are many domains of the feminine. I'm just choosing a few here. I'm just going through some. So when, for example, the divine feminine is literally in her grace, when she's being permissive, when she's surrendered in her posture, she feels safe in order to surrender. For any aspect of self to surrender, you must feel safe at some level. Even if you're traversing the unknown and that's very scary, there's some element of safety for you to take action to actually surrender. And so the ease that comes, the grace that comes, the surrendering that comes with being in divine feminine posture means that the feminine within feels very safe. And so part of that is feeling very grounded. So part of the domain of the feminine is feeling very grounded and earthy, and knowing that the feminine within is supported by earth, is supported by a larger structure and a deeper energy. And to root into that, that's where the softness and the heart opening and the intuition can come forward. That's where you'll see a woman that is nurturing and compassionate, that is non-judgmental in her posturing. No matter what is happening in her outside world, she's so grounded in her being. She's deeply connected to earth. There's a tenderness, another feminine attribute. There's flow in her communication, in the way she interacts with others. There's no rigidity and sharpness. There's just flow and beauty. Aesthetic beauty, emotional beauty. Beauty can be defined by balance in this sense. The divine feminine is very balanced in her being.
Well, damn.
I know.
Well, damn.
That's so many images.
That sounds accurate.
Now that makes, I don't know if you ever saw it. Laura has a 4-year-old, so we watch Moana all the time with her daughter.
Love that movie.
Yeah. Well, and at the end of the movie, I mean, you just literally described that scene where the fire monster or whatever, she becomes the queen and the goddess, and then she grows over and then she surrenders to the earth and becomes the mountain. Like, I have said for months that movie is, that to me is the embodiment of divine feminine, divine masculine. And I think you just really sum that up, because she surrenders into the earth and she's co-creating, and she's got all this beauty and lushness around her. Yeah, that's what I pictured as you were talking about that. So
yeah, I'm hearing that.
Thank you for solidifying that in my mind. Beat that drum forever now. So we're just flying through these questions. So divinity, let's just talk about it now. This divine energy that we all carry within us. Part of my journey was sort of clawing myself out of the shadow side and out of the wounded energy that I was in because of traumas and abusive relationships, and just nurture over my nature, I guess is the best way to say it. So how can a person quickly identify when they're in their wounded or shadow side energy? And what can we do to quickly, I mean, this is a loaded question, so I understand that it's not probably a simple answer, but like, what can we do to pull ourselves out of that and enjoy the process of pulling ourselves out of that?
It's actually not that complex. It is complex and it's not. It's actually quite simple. And I don't mean to oversimplify or reduce what you're asking or reduce the process in any capacity, but sometimes I'm not a fan of oversimplification and reductionist approaches to life. I become content to simplify complex ideas. I think that's very important. And at the same time, not to oversimplify. But there's two things that I would do in that case. The first is have a belief system and really set a value for yourself that life is not one-sided. When we have a lopsided view of life, we suffer, full stop. That's it. We just suffer. So when we understand that challenge is an intricate and necessary part of life, and growth and expansion is one of our grandest prerogatives for being human and expressing and experiencing consciousness, or consciousness experiencing itself, or whatever you want to call it, however you want to see life. We become at greater ease, because when trouble or fear or pain or adversity or challenge it comes to us, we don't greet it with apprehension and we don't shove it in a knapsack that we carry for the rest of our lives that becomes our shadow self, which weighs hundreds or thousands of tons. We basically meet life where it's at, and we say, okay, this is happening for me, not to me. And therefore we're open to the experience, just as we would be open to, hey, someone knocks on your door and says, here's a check for $1 billion, it's yours, free, just take it, no tax. No. We would be ecstatic about that. And so if we can meet difficulty and pain and challenge in that same way, which for me personally is something that I'm growing into, it's not always easy, but I can catch myself quicker and quicker these days, is we're going to experience some profound insights in life. So the first thing I say is, can you just have, this is a preventative measure, can you have an ideology of life that you can meet every experience no matter what it looks like, and not judge the moment, not be attached to the moment? That's number one. And that's a preventative. You don't do that. You do that in the moment, but it's done in the moment effectively because you work on it on a daily basis. You're aware of it on a daily basis, irrespective of what's happening in your world. The second part to that is state change. Have a physiological state change. When you're met with change, difficulty, challenge, pain, whatever, change your state. Have a cold shower, jump up and down for 5 minutes, do 35 burpees, go for a run, hit an airdyne or a bike or something, weight train, literally change your body, have an ice bath. Whatever you need to do to change and get your body moving so the emotion can move through you, that's the first step. Then you can begin to assess and diagnose and go deeper and journal and express and surround yourself with wise counsel and all of that stuff. But the first thing, 2 steps, I'm not going to overcomplicate it for your audience, is have an underlying belief that challenge is actually, difficulty can be healthy. You don't have to pursue it. You don't have to cut your leg off to know what deep challenge is in any capacity. But when it comes to you, can you greet it with an open heart and open mind? And the second thing is, when you're really met with intensity, state change. State change. I'll add a bonus because state change won't always work for everyone immediately. The bonus is, or another immediate thing you can do is pause. Power of pause. Pause for 3 breaths, 5 breaths, or 10 breaths. And just pause and breathe into the situation. And you can ask yourself a number of different questions, and whatever will resonate with you. And one is what's happening now really true? Or what is the outcome that I want from this situation? Or what's an alternative set of feelings that I can feel that aren't so uncomfortable so I can deal with what's unpacking right now? But long, slow, deep breaths, at least 6 to 7 seconds on an inhale and 6 to 7 seconds on an exhale, will kick in your parasympathetic nervous system. So you're then in rest and digest mode, and your whole body, your physiology will relax, and you become more open-minded. You won't become so narrow and minded in survival mode, and you'll be able to deal with the issue with a greater robustness. That's what I would recommend.
I love all of those.
That is powerful and very simple.
Yes. Well done.
Boom.
Boom. Mic drop moment right there.
Boom. This has been an amazing conversation. I could literally talk to you for hours and hours and hours. But we want to be mindful of your time. So we're going to ask you one last question that we ask all of our guests on the podcast. What does the word luscious mean to you?
Oh, that's such a good question. All the things. It means all the things. I'm gonna piggyback off what I just said now. It means just complete presence and attention to everything that's unraveling. Can eating a peach be as luscious as having sex with your lover? Can being stuck in traffic be as luscious as skydiving, or can be as luscious as receiving the greatest gift that you've ever received, or your wedding day, or something that is really important to you? That's luscious is just all the things. Can we make everything luscious?
I love that you said biting into a peach, because the last guy we had on the podcast talked about biting into strawberries.
Yes. I love it.
I love it.
Oh my gosh.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This has been an absolute pleasure. I literally took notes.
So did I.
Where can people discover you, find you in all the places on the interwebs?
Connect with you. Yeah.
On the line. Okay. So on the line, you can find me at stefanossafandos.com, and all my social media handles are stefanossafandos. And my other website, which is for men, is reclaimyourkingdom.com.
Amazing.
We will include all of that in the show notes for our listeners. And yeah, just thank you so much. It was such an honor having you on.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And likewise, thank you for having me.
Hey, Luscious Hustler. Thank you for sharing your time with us today. We are over the moon grateful that you joined our conversation. If you can take 2 minutes to share this episode with a fellow entrepreneur or side hustler, it will not only have a massive positive impact on their life, but it will also signal to the universe that you are ready to take inspired action.
Then head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. Let us know what you enjoy and what you would like to hear more of. It will support us on our mission to empower women to build the businesses of their dreams. Until next time, Luscious Hustler.